Hello my quilting friends, Leah Day here with a new collaboration video. Last month I did a collaboration with Sherry Schifaldi Morel and she sent me a road work quilt, a miniature quilt that looked like a road, and I had a really good time quilting it. Well, time for me to fess up. She actually sent me two, and the second one is a slightly different colorway, and it allowed me a lot more opportunity to play and try out new designs. So let's get on the machine. I'm going to show you how I quilted the second block. So I want to show you my plan for this quilting design. I've taken my favorite ceramic marking pencil and I've marked over the surface, adding in some curving lines, some straight lines. I branched out a little bit of tree roots coming out of these triangle shapes. I think the only piecing I'm really going to pay attention to are these rectangles, and I might stitch some straight lines across that. But really, this piece is going to be a wide variety of textures, and I'm really going to let the design flow. And looking at this, I think the very first step would be to quilt this curving line so that way I can start breaking down the space. So that's my plan. Let's get started. So I'm getting started just quilting along some of these lines that I've marked. And then this is right down the center of the block, and I just want a nice long curving line through this area. And the idea here is I'm going to completely ignore the piecing, or mostly ignore the piecing. If you remember in the last video, I really paid a lot of attention to the piecing, and that was a big part of the quilting design. This time I want to do something very different and pretend like this is just, you know, kind of an open palette for me to play and do whatever I want to with it. And I think that's going to be really exciting. It's going to create a really cool effect. So now through this area, I decided to quilt a combination of designs. Some of my favorite designs have this long curvy line base, and then I fill in gaps within the design, and you can fill it with circles, and that becomes pebbles in a stream, and you can fill it with stippling, like micro stippling, and it becomes Goldilocks. So what we're going to do is we're just going to play around with lots of different ways to fill in gaps. But the first step is to quilt some long parallel lines, long curving lines, just like this. And I'm trying to keep these roughly about 3/8 of an inch apart. Doesn't have to be exact, and I'm not going to take a ruler to it. And this is a flowing organic design, so even if it veers a little bit big or a little bit small, that's going to be okay. All right, so I'm in the batting area and I'm going to take a look at my design. I think I want to start my first gap. And I just got my foot all caught up in that batting. Not a big deal. You just grab a hold of it and pull all that stuff off so that way your foot can move evenly. And then now I'm going to wiggle out and create a very free-form gap. So wiggly line, and then connect with my starting line. And I really want this gap to stand out nicely, so I'm going to fill it full of circles for pebbling. And some of these circles are going to be quite small, and then I'm going to go into bigger circles as I can fit them into the space. So swinging around, maybe stitching some half circle shapes in here, just really whatever will fit. And what I want to do also is to do a lot of travel stitching around these circles, around the edges of the space, and that's going to make it stand out a lot too. And that's going to take a little bit more time. It's going to add a little bit more time to the quilt. This is one of those situations where when I have a specific look in mind, I'm willing to put a little bit more time and effort into it just to get that effect out of the design. So just slow and steady work here, filling in some circles. And when I'm visualizing those circles, I'm just kind of eyeballing the midpoint of where I guess the circle would be, and that helps me to fill that in and quilt a nice smooth circle shape. Whenever I can, I do a half circle against an edge, and that always ends up looking really nice. And another thing I could do if I really wanted to spend a lot of time in it is I could fill in all of the gaps between the circles and kind of do a little bit of thread painting almost between them. I don't think I have quite that much time for this quilt, so I'm not going to do that, but that's another way that you can really punch up the intensity and make it stand out that much better. As it is, I'm just going to add quite a lot of travel stitching, just a little bit more thread play. You know, if you ever see your stitches getting a little bit big or you feel like they're just looking a little too chunky, try putting your foot down and just speeding up the machine just a bit, but leave your hands the same, moving at the same rate. And what that's going to do is shrink down the sizes of your stitches. It's always a balancing ratio with free motion quilting. It's always balancing the movement of your hands with the speed of your machine. So by speeding up your machine but leaving your hands the same, you will produce some smaller stitches. So here I'm filling in the last little bit of these circles, just stacking them together. Every once in a while I like to form a nice big circle, and that makes it stand out too. You know, it's kind of a series of contrasts. I think I'm going to say that a lot today. I want a lot of contrast within this block. A lot of straight lines, sharp angles, a lot of soft lines, a lot of curves, and a lot of organic shapes like circles and flowing lines too. So there we go. That space is nicely filled, and now what I'm going to do is travel stitch all the way around that area so it stands out nicely against the quilt. And the way it's standing out is I'm using contrasting thread. So this is a light blue thread that stands out nicely. And then by doubling it, by travel stitching on top, and oops, I just realized I kind of forgot this little spot here. So kind of nice that I was going back over it so I didn't forget and leave this open. So 2 layers of thread. When I travel stitch around and add that extra layer of thread, it makes it that much thicker and denser on the surface of the quilt. And that makes it stand out too. Sometimes when I talk about that, I will say it looks darker, when in fact actually it's the opposite. It looks lighter because it's more light thread on top of a medium to dark quilt. But darker is the way, I mean, it means bold. Like whenever you use a bold font on your computer, it feels more bold to me, and that also makes it stand out just a little bit better. So now I'm traveling back along this line, and please keep in mind, all of this is extra. I didn't have to do any of that, but I wanted to because I think it'll make the quilt look that much better. But because that added so much extra time, I'm going to be kind of careful about how I place those gaps and how much I add to the quilt. You know, I can fill in with these echoing lines a lot more and a lot faster. So here I've created a very small gap, and I think that's going to add a nice punch of texture. I'm going to fill this in and keep adding more echoing lines, and I'll meet you back here. We're ready to move on to another design. So now I'm quilting in this straight line area. Basically I have 2 lines running through the block that are straight and parallel, and I'm breaking this space up into triangles. So how to do this is really simple. It might look a little complicated, but it's actually really easy. First I stitched a zigzaggy line through the space, and then now I'm stitching basically from one side to another or from one point to another and breaking up the space into triangles. Now I ended up with kind of a squarish shape, 4 points, so all I have to do is stitch from point to point and that becomes a triangle, or 2 triangles I should say. So now I'm going to stitch a design called Modern Weave. Basically I fill up that triangle with more straight lines, and sometimes my straight lines aren't exactly perfectly straight, and that's okay. This design's really forgiving. Doesn't matter if the lines aren't perfectly straight. But one thing I do want is I want to make sure that those are coming to one point and that they change with each triangle. So right here I have all of those lines coming to this point. In this triangle I have all the lines coming to this point. In this triangle back here I have all coming to that point. Now I think I'm going to have all of them coming to the point that I started on. And it really, you know, it's one of those things that you can definitely play with and vary the texture just by how you pick which point to focus on, which point to stitch into, and then back out of. It's a really, really simple design. As you can see, it's flowing really quickly through this space. And I really like that texture. I think it's a nice alternative, kind of a nice contrast to that pebbles in a stream that I stitched through the other area. So now another design that I'm kind of mixing it up with is the spiral design, and that is called Garden Maze. So I'm going to travel stitch over here, break up a few more triangles, and I'll show you how to quilt that. So here's a nice big space. How am I going to break this down and make a lot more triangles out of this big space? Basically, I'm going to get right into the center of one side, and I'm going to stitch from a side to a point. Anytime you stitch from a side to a point, you break up the space into 2 triangles. Now I'm going to travel stitch back to the middle of a side. And it doesn't even have to be the middle. You can kind of eyeball that. It doesn't have to be perfect. And now I'm going to stitch from that side to a point again. So in this space, I think that's where I'm going to put my garden maze. I'm going to fill this in with straight line echoes. Echo is just stitching a set distance away. In this case, a little bit less than 1/4 inch away. And now I'm turning that into a spiral, just coming inside that area. And this is a closed spiral, which means I need to travel stitch now carefully to get all the way back out. And this is one of those fun things, I think, taking 2 designs or even 3 designs. I could add a 3rd design. There's a lot of designs that I've created that are based off of this breakdown into triangles and then filling in those triangle spaces with different shapes. So there's a lot of designs I could quilt in this area, and I'm not limited to just 2. I think I want to keep it simple, break it down, add those occasional spirals. I think that'll make it look interesting, because there is a point where it can be too much, where it can just be really overwhelming. I'm going to stick with my straight lines, occasionally stitch some garden maze, but I think that's going to look good. I'll meet you back here when we're ready to tackle the next section next. The next design I'm going to quilt is tree roots, and I've marked it here and stitched in the ditch around this little triangle. So I'm just going to start quilting some of these marked lines. So I'm just going to stitch out and branch out along that line, and then stitch back and branch out again. And it's okay to use the marks as a guide and kind of make it up as you go along. Sometimes I won't quilt a line fully, like I decided that one looked better a little shorter. But what is going to make this design look best is a lot of travel stitching. So I'm probably going to go back over my lines 2 or 3 times. It's again that contrast, making the lines bold and intense. That's my goal here. So now I'm stitching down, and the reason I wanted to mark this on the block is I wanted to fill in the space and keep the lines very soft and flowing. We've got a lot of different types of lines. We've got straight lines, curvy lines, the pebbling, a lot of different textures going on. And I wanted these areas of tree roots to be an area of simplicity within the quilt, where that stands out over and on top of everything else. Got a lot going on here, I will admit, and I'm, halfway done with it, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to come out. It's one of those funny things, I think, when you get to a certain stage of a quilt, sometimes it can start to look like too much, and you have to just keep going. You have to just plow through that tricky area and keep on stitching, keep on adding texture. And then in the end, even if it's not quite right or not quite what you were aiming for, you learn something. So even if it's not perfect, I'm not going to be upset because I'll have learned more about quilting at the end of it. So I've knocked out all of those lines, and now I'm stitching right back along, kind of just travel stitching back and forth. Again, this is totally optional. It's one of those things that I like to do when I'm stitching something special and really punching up the texture, but it's not something I would do on a bed quilt, on something that I'm just gonna, finish and give to James to drag around the house. So really, this is just a process of continuing to stitch on the lines that I've marked, all of those flowing lines, filling it in. If I decide to add more lines, just making sure that I don't lock up the texture too much, because I really want it to stand out nicely on the quilt. And here's what it looks like whenever I finished this Road Work quilt. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot seeing how I quilted the second Road Work mini quilt. You can find the quilt pattern for Road Work, which comes in lots of different sizes, so you can make it a lot bigger than this little mini. And you can find the pattern at Sherry's website, wholecirclestudio.com. If you have any questions about this quilting process or why I decided to quilt the designs the way I did, please ask in the comments below. I really want to help you learn more about quilting. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, please like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube so you don't miss the next video coming out soon. Until next time, let's go quilt!